Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 16th, 2024 Board of Education special meeting. With us this evening is Mr. Prasnock, Mr. Lee, Mrs. Flynn, Mrs. Guernsey, Mrs. Jacobson, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, and Mrs. Rinaldi, as well as our superintendent, Mr. Testani. If you could all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, moving on to our item number 3, discussion of the superintendent's 2024-2025 budget request. Review the sections, include listed pages and all accompanying pages. So just for the members of the public, there is a document of Q&A that has been posted to the agenda area of our website. Board members had submitted questions for the covered areas for this evening. And just for board members, even though there's some questions that have been answered from other evenings, those will not be covered tonight. Those will be covered next week when we get to those areas. And thank you to all of the staff that worked hard in getting these questions to us today. Much appreciated, especially with the weather and the storm and everything. So thank you very much for that. And then also for board members, if you are asking a question about something, it's always helpful to other board members and the public if you reference either the page and question number on this document and the page that you are referencing in the board book. So just so that everybody can follow along as we proceed. So with that, unless anyone has any questions, we will move on to the first section, review section, enhancements, historical data, pages 1 to 4. Just a sidebar too, we do have additional staff that are joining us on WebEx. So if they're not here, they are available on WebEx for questions as well. 1 to 4, anyone? Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
And I'll get it started. On the sheet, I was starting to ask it around question A19, and this was regarding, I know it says Ms. Rinaldi. I don't know what happened, but that was my question regarding about the middle school teams. And based on the enrollment numbers from our most recent enrollment report, I have a lot of concerns about this because right now, if you take the 5th grade enrollment across all 11 of our elementary schools, add those up for what we would anticipate is approximately the enrollment projection for 6th grade at each of our 3 middle schools. If you have 2 teams at Tomlinson and 3 teams each at our other 2 schools, and I know this never happens exactly, but if you evenly divided those among 4 team members, you would have an average class size of 19 at Woods and Roger Ludlow and 26 at Tomlinson. And I didn't submit those numbers in the question. And so, as I think many of us will say many times tonight, I'm not necessarily expecting an answer, but that to me is an inappropriate discrepancy given the learners that we have. It's inappropriate. I mean, it's tough anyway. And I do respect that we're relooking at that. I think it's always, I think we as a board always appreciate that when something's been tried, we like knowing that there's been reflection on it and did something work or did it not. So that's not an issue. I actually really appreciate that. But I have a real problem with those kind of numbers. Because again, this is the year of that very large 5th grade at McKinley, which is really bumping Tomlinson's numbers higher. And I'll just throw that out there. Again, I don't know if that's something anyone can speak to or if they'd be willing to consider and give me more information next week.
Yeah, we did realize based on the enrollment projections that it would lower the class size to 19, 20-ish, give or take, at Ludlow Middle and Woods Middle. We didn't really look completely at Tomlinson, but we do anticipate, according to some of the SLAM projections, that Tomlinson's numbers in 6th grade will take a little bit of a dive next year. So I think that 26 probably comes down based on some of the predictions that we got and projections from SLAM. So we can find out what exactly that would look like. I want to say off the top of my head, we were looking at 22, 23-ish, not 26, based on their numbers. But again, that could change.
Yeah, and I guess that's where because again, obviously, projections we always know are wrong the next day, the moment they've been published. But their projections were high for Roger Ludlow and Woods. And now I'm forgetting, hold on.
They were going down at Tomlinson next year. If I remember correctly, I have that on my desk actually, when we started talking about this. So you're right, around 1920-ish is correct. Class size would be at Woods and Roger Ludlow Middle based on those projections. But I believe the Tomlinson numbers do come down.
And I guess I would be interested to know what the basis is, because that is a tremendous drop that we are all but hoping happens, which we never hope that students are leaving the district, you know, whether it's for private school for years or whatever the reason is. But again, I would be very concerned of walking into this knowing that based on who is in our buildings right now for fifth grade, average class size of 26, and we know we can never balance that. And not because of the math needs and the world language needs. So I get why there's discrepancies, but with the way those discrepancies usually work, you're immediately looking at class sizes. There will be some of 30 if those numbers hold true. And even if it came down a little bit, I just repeat that I'm concerned about that.
Okay.
Mr. Lee.
I don't know if this is something we want to discuss openly or it has to go to an executive session. When it talks about the security and safety of school on page 2, and we're replacing the resource. I have a question. Are we replacing with Fairfield Police?
No. So what we're doing at Walter Fitzgerald currently, the security officer that's there outside of the resource officer, there's a security guard that is part of the contracted services. We are replacing the contracted service provider with our own staff member. And then we already have a Fairfield Public School security officer, one at Ludlow, one at Ward. We're adding an additional one. So those are the 3 that we're adding, and we're reducing the one contracted from Walter Fitzgerald. We just feel it'd be best to have our own person up there that's consistent and not changing based on what the contractor can provide.
So that's the door greeter when you walk in the school. They're the ones that know the kids, say hi to the kids, but they're not necessarily former or current law enforcement.
Correct. So the SROs, nothing changes with the school resource officers in terms of Fairfield PD. Those all stay consistent unless the PD decides to do something different in their allocation of staffing. But the chief has not mentioned any reduction to the SRO division of the Fairfield Police. Thanks.
Mrs. Guernsey.
Hi, wanted to just sort of expand on question A13, which is page 1 in the budget book, and it is related to instructional leadership. So my question is primarily around the combination of the art coordinator and the music coordinator position. You know, the question I asked is around the decrease of support, and the answer was that there is no decrease in support. And I'd just like to examine that a little bit further, because right now we have 1.0 FTE dedicated to our music coordinator position. If we add to that 0.6 FTE, which is the art coordinator, that equals 1.6 FTE that is dedicated exclusively to these kinds of administrative coordinator tasks. So to take the 1.6 down to 1.0, that is in fact a decrease. And we know that best practices at similar districts this size that have exceptional programming like we do here in Fairfield, operate with more than one art director across those 2 areas. And when they don't, in a system like, for example, Greenwich, where they do have one art coordinator, they have 6 stipend or liaison positions that report to them because of the elementary, middle, and high school level for both music and art. So to take this position that we worked so hard to get to full 1 FTE in the music department and to sort of take away that level of attention really concerns me. And so just like wanting to re-examine that question, thinking about the number of staff. I mean, the music coordinator works with a staff size that's equivalent to like the number of staff in an elementary school. So, this is an area of concern. I just want to probably explore that some more, and I'm going to probably have some more questions about that. So I don't know if you have any response now, but I'd love to hear more about your thinking for this position, because I really do think that this particular area should be two separate full FTEs. And then the other areas, sort of when we do the math, we add 0.6 plus 0.4, that equals 1. So that kind of makes more sense to me. Thank you.
Well, I mean, we were just thinking initially in talking to some districts that do have the position as a combined position, in some case larger than us, to give it a try and if we find that we need to split it next year. But right now, neither one of them are administrators. They really follow teacher's contract, which is somewhat prohibitive as well. I think that we will expect a lot more from them time-wise. As an administrator, similar to, as I mentioned, our athletic directors put a lot more time in, weekends, evenings, vacations, simply because the demands of the job. I don't see why one person wouldn't be able to do it. I don't think there's as an extensive demand on this position here as there would be if you looked at, just watching what our athletic directors currently do in terms of the time and the number of coaches, number of student athletes. So I just wanted to kind of ease into it and get an assessment before we would say we would need 2 people. But I mean, more than happy to take on additional resources, just not sure and confident to say that we would need 2 without at least trying it as 1 first. I'm not dismissing that there's a need. I just don't know how much of a need. I really, without having at least a year or some time to reevaluate. But more than happy to talk about if you want to put 2 positions in.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in that. Thank you.
I have a follow-up. Thank you for the links to the job descriptions. I'm looking at A12. I did have a chance to pull that up. I just want to make a note that when you click on the world language and EL and the health and the PE, it still just brings up the fine arts. So I think that maybe the separate links didn't work out so well. But the fine arts one, and as a follow-up to Carol's, it does require either a certification in either art or music, not both. So if we are expecting them to have both, why would we not require both certifications?
I don't think you're going to find too many individuals that would have both certifications. And in the districts that do have one, it's either or. I mean, the main thing would be having one or the other, plus, again, the 092 certification so that they can supervise the teachers.
Okay. And then for the coordinators, their 0.4 are teaching. I'm trying to count FTE here. So their 0.4 for the world language, the art, the PE, and the health. Are those 0.4s teachings going away as well, or just their 0.6 coordinator part?
Well, for example, for the art, she teaches a 0.2, but she is against the budget of 1.0. So they would bump unless we, through attrition, we would have a vacancy in the department. So it would,
I'm just looking.
It would reduce the teaching allocation based on them becoming now full 1.0 and actually teach the 1.0, not 0.4.
Okay, so the 0.4s are going to become a 1.0 for all of them? So like 0.4 health, for example, or 0.4 PE, they're going to become 1.0 health and 1 PE?
Oh, thanks, James. Okay.
We are not adding an additional 0.6 with this. So that 0.4 would essentially rift another teacher to teach those classes, reduce in force.
Can I just add, so just to be clear, we're reducing the coordinator position, but not the portion of the FTE that's related to their teaching. So the teaching does not reduce in terms of the budgeted FTEs.
Okay. So I'm thinking about the people. Okay. And then, and everyone who is currently, if they want to apply for one of those 092s,
We're encouraging them to apply if
they would have to apply.
if they have the certificate, the 092 certification. I'm not sure if all do. I am aware that there's at least a couple that do.
All right, can we find that out, please? And then I just want to talk about the logic a little bit of the combinations. I get the fine arts, but world language and ELL, two totally separate certifications, classical world languages and ELL. So what was the rationale about having one person? Again, are they certified in world languages and ELL?
Probably not, but that's kind of I'm going to say the industry standard, but that's pretty common across districts that put a supervisor in that area. The ELL, if it's somebody that has a world language background, we would be able to provide them with professional learning opportunities and work alongside of them as well to improve any of their, deficits in the knowledge of running the department. But I mean, we wouldn't have enough to have two split positions. I mean, we just don't have enough to keep it, to justify an administrator for both.
Well, we have like ELA, we have science, we have social studies, we have administrators that are single subject administrators. So I was just wanting to understand why we comboed them.
Well, with larger departments.
World language is pretty big, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, but taking on the ELL is not.
Okay, I just wanted to see what you're thinking about that. Okay, that anyone else on this item? Oh, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Yeah, a couple of things. I wasn't clear, Mrs. Jacobson, what you meant by find out regarding the 092.
Which of them have it?
Because I don't think that's relevant. If we want the position, we post the position. I mean, it's just like
I'm
what
just
we
curious.
when we did with the assistant principals last year at the elementary schools. We didn't go and find that out. How many
We
of you are
did.
qualified?
We did find that out.
Okay, all right. Actually, you're right. I do remember that as a question. I withdraw that. With the fine arts, I asked the question regarding the acted classes, and I understand that they're under the English department, but I know we'd asked before, do they count towards the English credit? And we were told no. So that it counts towards humanities. It does not count as an English class. It doesn't replace it. But so I just want to check, does it still count under the fine arts in terms of the graduation requirement?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to check that. And secondly, I just want to follow up on Mrs. Guernsey's point, because I certainly don't want anything that's going to dilute the quality of the district. I would not be in favor of two positions at this time for the same reason that while I was keenly interested with what we did with math last year, I had to kind of sit back and accept we've got to let that play out to see how that works with one person, math, science, in terms of elementary school. And, I understand that it's too early for us to get feedback on that position. But if we have that as a single person, I think we'd have to do the same with this until we get the feedback on how is this actually working. Because I do think I agreed with Mrs. Guernsey at first, but then that's a really valuable reminder that they're no longer working a teacher's schedule. So thank you for that reminder. And then that's all for that.
Mrs. Lynn?
Looking at paper. So I'm looking at question A1, which is on page 2. I have a subsequent amount of ECC questions kind of in different spots, but I'm going to hone in on that first. Can you speak to Holland Hill as the site you guys are headed on? When I'm looking at the projections for next year, we're looking at 19 projected class sections, which the inventory that was used during redistricting, that hits right at that number. So we have an art room, a music room, a STEAM room, which is shared with MLL, 2 SPED rooms, which I assume are for K through 5 services, and an MST. Is there currently an OT and PT room at Holland Hill?
I believe so, yes.
So I'm just, I guess my holistic question is, where is that going to fit at Holland Hill and how?
Hi, Rob Mancusi, Executive Director, Special Education. What I can say is we consulted with the principal of Holland Hill, Molly Farrell. I did a walkthrough of the building with Angelus, looked at the space. Obviously, the building is newer. The spaces are a lot more conducive to ECC students, and it was one of the top, locations that we had reviewed back 5 or 6 years ago for ECC expansion.
No, and I remember the list of priorities, and it seems that Holland Hill hits quite a few of those boxes. But as watching this work go on, obviously something is going to be moved to accommodate 2 classrooms and all the support services. I'm assuming some offices that are needed. So where are those other services being moved to?
Currently, there is one building in the district who has, I believe, STEAM on a cart. So that may be the situation at Holland Hill as well.
And I think this might be a question for Angelos. This is referencing now to question 8.2. Can you just speak to any modifications, playground needs, ADA? Is there anything that there's no budgetary impact, so can you just speak to that?
We're not anticipating a budgetary impact on it. There is some work that will need to be done, but we will outfit that within the operating budget. Don't forget, Holland Hill currently has a classroom dedicated for the Math Academy, which is going to be moving out of there. And they have 2 classrooms that are dedicated for special ed services, which we would probably combine into a 1 classroom split between teachers. So there is room within the building to make some modifications.
You mean the 6th grade, not Math Academy, the advanced?
I apologize. You're right. Yes.
So, okay, so that will be a different question. You just said we would take care of it within the operating budget, which means this budget.
Correct. So we're not anticipating large costs to make the renovations needed.
I think the question is what is going, so it doesn't have to, if you don't have it tonight, more of a detail of what is needed.
We can put that together for you.
Sorry, Mrs. Flynn.
Okay. I'm just looking at the count because I just want to make it clear for the 2023-24 actuals, there are 19 sections, and the 20th is the 6th grade math, so there's 1. And then the STEAM MLO, that's 2. Okay. And the playground at Holland Hill, is that currently feasible for pre-K?
One of the building committee people is shaking his head, yes.
And I appreciate that. Is there a secondary playground at Holland Hill currently, or only 1?
There is technically 3 playgrounds. There's 2 at the bottom of the hill, 1 at the top of the hill.
I'm just asking just in terms of, rotation for our K-5 students and making sure that all the needs are being met. Thank you.
If I can interrupt, I believe the one on the top, when it was redesigned, is ADA. The reason it was redesigned was for ADA purposes.
Just through the chair, I'd just like to request that any of the proposed ECC sites, if it's Holland Hill or if there are any others being thought of, if we could possibly set up tours for board members who are interested, considering it's going to be happening so quickly. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Rinaldi.
I'm a Holland Hill parent and my son's at ECC. So this is very, very important to me. I got a little bit of anxiety and excitement seeing Holland Hill as a site. I do worry at the beginning of this year, we did get a large influx of new students. And what I heard is that they are anticipating that again. They had to expand and have another 1st grade classroom. So my daughter actually got moved with a new teacher that started. She basically was hired 2 days before the school year. Has this been thought of as well, just needing to expand classrooms at Holland Hill? Because I've heard that they are anticipating even more students going there.
I mean, we're looking at the enrollment projections that SLAM provided us, so I don't know where they're getting any information outside of that there could be even more than what's projected, but we can have that conversation, but that hasn't been brought to our attention.
Okay, thank you. And I agree with Katie. I'd really like to do a tour because I've been at Holland Hill. I'm there all the time, and I do worry about the space considerations and just having enough space and hopefully not having a cart for STEAM and other extracurricular things of that nature.
I have a couple, and I'm not sure who this question will go to, about the ECC as well, and the number of classrooms. So just gonna say that throughout the budget book, it's inconsistent in terms of the number of classrooms. So, for example, on this page 2, it says 2 additional classrooms. And in other areas, it says 2 as well, but then in other areas and in the superintendent's presentation, it says 3. And then in the ECC presentation that we got in December, it says 2. So can we just, and then the dollars are the same, whether it says 2 or 3. So
It's 3. 1 additional classroom at Stratfield and the 2 additional classrooms at Holland Hill.
so the budget book on page 2 should say 3.
Correct, Jen, that's my mistake. It's the only place that we saw it referenced as 2. So if you find another, but it should be 3 consistently everywhere. The challenge, one of the issues was that we're only adding 2 teachers because we have an existing vacancy in the ECC. So it's a net increase of 2 teachers, although it's 3 classrooms, 3 total teachers dedicated to the expansion. So I apologize.
Okay, I'm happy to send you the pages, Mrs. Laborious.
Okay, thank you.
Separately. All right, so it's 188 for the teaching staff. That's not all in, right? So the question here is all in for this, but for the 3 additional classrooms, it's 299, 131. That's everything, modifications, supplies, materials, equipment, staff, paras, whatever it may be.
Can I just clarify, that's everything that's budgeted for? So that would be the 3.2 staff. And that also includes supplies, materials, and then the additional need for health insurance. So the original number of 188 was just for the 3.2 staff. The total amount of 299 that you see referenced in the Q&A document is for the additional $30K that we're budgeting for materials plus the health insurance. But that's the total if you include those 2 pieces.
Thank you, Mrs. Laborious. And then what's moving at Stratfield for the 5th classroom?
Currently, the ECC uses that as a for their gym classes.
So there's a room at, the adaptive PE classroom.
Correct.
Okay, I'm thinking of the auditorium in my head. Okay. Okay. So where would they go? Would they just use the regular gym then?
Yes, and again, we consulted with Ms. McGarvey, the principal of Stratfield School, about working together to make that happen. And she did not have any concerns with being able to work the ECC into the schedule for PE.
Mr. Lee?
Don't, correct me if I'm wrong, only certain schools though can have an ECC classroom, right? Because there are certain needs that a lot of the schools don't have, such as HVAC, ADA approval. So our pool is very small where we could put the ECC classrooms to begin with.
That's correct.
Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
Just to follow up, how many schools would fit the category that Mr. Lee just said?
I would have to get that information for you. I don't have it tonight.
Because I don't believe there are that many at this point. With all the renovations that we've done,
That is correct. The pool is growing, and with phase 1 air conditioning underway, it will be getting even larger. So it's, I don't want to misspeak, but I want to say it's approximately 2 or 3 class buildings that would not be able to accommodate.
okay, thank you.
Sorry, Mrs. Flynn.
I'm just going to ask a follow-up that I meant to ask for. Can you just speak to the bathrooms? Because I would assume that the classrooms that you're looking at are going to be, are there enough bathrooms to meet the needs of the kindergartners at Holland Hill?
There are.
Mr. Krasnov.
Just a quick follow-up. Are we gonna need more than these classrooms? Is this enough? Because first we were at 2, now we're at 3. Is it gonna go to 4? I just have concerns we're starting to run out of space very, very quickly.
That could happen over time, given the fact that there are some, I think, legislative priorities that are going to be brought forth in this session that could potentially add to more of a need in the future. I know that there are some groups advocating that There is a September 1 hard date that if you're not born before that, you do not have an option to go to kindergarten. So stay tuned.
Do we have a pretty good idea of who is already in the program, who's staying? And obviously, there will be opened up some additional pupils, obviously, to fill out the classes, I'm assuming.
We have a relatively good idea. Many parents who have weighed in on, they haven't made a hard commitment, but a contact has been made with the parents of that 4+ cohort, who, are in that age range where they're impacted by their ability to start kindergarten.
So am I correct to say odds are we'll need at least these 3?
We've seen growth over the past several years in the ECC. About 6 years ago, I believe it was, we expanded from the Ward site into Stratfield, and then the number of classes at Stratfield expanded, and so we continue just to see that expansion.
Well, actually, we moved them from Dwight and Burr into Stratfield, right?
When both programs joined together.
Please, Mr. Lee.
So I know we need the HVAC and ADA approved bathrooms and everything for ECC, but the 2 or 3 current approvals that we're moving for the projects, they're just putting HVACs in. Are those schools ADA approved to the state where they need to be?
They will take Osborne, for instance. Osborne is a single level building, so it would meet most of the criteria right off the bat from adding the HVAC systems. The requirements for state and requirements for what the board put together as a checklist of requirements for an ECC, we're basing it off of the requirements that the board had put together many years ago when looking at locations, because they far out exceed what the state requires.
Thanks.
Mrs. Lynn.
Last follow-up, I swear. Rob, could we ever get a breakdown of the ECCs by section with numbers? No, for a projected with this included.
For a projection for next year?
Well, next year, and now that document that we have isn't relative anymore, just because I'm curious how many full day students we're capturing right now with 4s. For instance, I would assume that many of our CLCs are full day students. So are we just to capture what it looks like across buildings, it might be helpful to visualize.
We can get that to you. We did do a presentation to the board on December 13th, I believe, where we did have a breakdown of the current enrollments in each section across all classrooms, including the breakdown of the ratios. We can get that again for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Krasnoff.
That's the meeting that I was referring to, and I think Ms. Jacobson was referring to that originally we only needed 2 classrooms. So where's the 3rd classroom coming from now?
Because of the number of students that we're anticipating potentially joining us because of the change in the legislation. And one of the things that we do find is very important for early childhood programming is to not be an isolated entity unto yourself. So that's where the 2 full day 4-year-old classrooms at Holland Hill came from, with the addition of a full day 4-year-old classroom at Stratfield, and then 2 at Ward. So we have 2 across all settings.
Up on the total cost for the $299. We're not talking about transportation tonight, but just in that $299 from this page, is that including any additional busing?
No.
Courtney, can you answer that?
Yeah, no, that does not include additional busing. We assumed we would subsume that within the transportation projection for need. So no, it did not include any transportation.
So boys, just one of my follow-ups will be, can we just get a total cost for the 3 rooms, please? Everything in.
Sure.
For next time, that would be great. Any other ECC? Okay. Anyone else? Questions 1 through 10? Mrs. Rinaldi.
Sorry, I do have a follow-up on ECC. So I'm sorry. Holland Hill does have an early start time compared to every other elementary school. Is that something that has been factored in as well? Because I'm sure that would factor into the full day program.
Yeah, we would look to end that day at 2:45, so the ECC students were not in the building alone. But
What about, but starting time?
the starting time would be like 9:15, I believe. If you can hold on 1 second.
Because the current is, it's, my husband dropped off, 9:10 to 3:10 is the full day at Ward and Stratfield.
I think we're proposing 9:10 to 2:45, but I'm going to confirm that with you next week. But that's, I think that's what we're going to be proposing for the full day.
Okay. So it would be different than the Holland Hill actual start time for kindergarteners.
It would be a different start time, yes.
Okay. There could be a little, congestion, and the principal was, made aware of this as well.
We did not talk about the specific start time. She knew what we were thinking. We talked with Angela to see what the impact on transportation would be if we had different start time, and we think we can make that work.
Okay, thank you.
I think the intention was to get all the Holland Hill students settled, and then the arrival would come for the ECC afterwards.
I guess I was just hoping that maybe the pre-K could do before care and after care, which my daughter partakes in, so.
All right, 1 through 10. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Okay, two last questions. As a follow-up to Mr. Peterson's question number 4, we considered slowly transitioning away from the contracted services with the security. And I know every year we're coming back and forth. Is it better to outsource this or not? So it's the analysis has been done that this is going to be considered. We consider going forward, this will end up being a savings because we're trying to move away from this contracting out.
I don't know if there'll be a savings, because obviously with our own security staff, we have benefits to pay as well. But I think, there's pretty much consensus amongst the principals that having our own staff there rather than dealing with contracted staff has a lot more upside. But we didn't want to go all in year one with 2 at each high school and then the 1 at Walter Fitz. So we're kind of transitioning through so that next year we can get away from contracted services altogether for the security staff.
And that's regarding the check-in person.
The
would be
greeter, right.
The greeter, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess just because the wording was I wanted to transition away from the services because of the FEA contract impact, so it makes it sound like it's going to cost less, but that's not a definite.
No,
Just wondering for expectations.
Yeah, we just wanted to minimize the budget increase to this year, knowing because of the FEA contract had such a impact on the ask for this year that we didn't want to go all in with security as well.
Oh, so never mind. I'm
Yes.
completely reading it wrong. In other
Yes,
words,
I'm sorry.
this is going to cost more by having our own hiring rather
Little
than
bit,
contracted.
yes.
My apologies, I misread that. And then on another topic for my question, A21, looking at the reduction, and obviously we have no way of knowing with this ASL ad, we wouldn't know that at this time, but that's looking then potentially at a spring, if we're saying this could be an area where there would be a reduction if it turns out we don't need the full FTE allocation.
Yeah, we're hoping that once all the course selections have been finalized from all the students, we can take a look to see how many sections of all the world languages that we're going to need to build out, and then from there, see what the impact will be positively or negatively on staff allocation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kresnov?
Sorry for all the questions about classrooms. I'm just trying to make sure we have the facility space. On A14, page 2, you referenced 6 sections, but when we just talked, you said 5. 2 at Holland Hill, 1 at Stratfield, 2 at Ward. Is there one more?
Those are 6 full day program sessions, and then there's 5 split sessions for a total of 11 classrooms across 3 sites.
So one of the Stratfields is gonna convert to a full day? So there'll be
Yes,
2 at each?
the additional one at Stratfield will be a full day program.
Cool, thank you.
Can we just clarify it's not 11, it's 13? Right?
Right now, our proposal for next year is 11 classes. It's,
No. Based on your description in this budget book, it's 13.
I'm sorry. You're correct.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on 1 through 10? Otherwise, we will move on. Okay. Review section instructional services, pages 54 to 58. Mr. Peterson?
Hi, thank you. I kind of have I'm trying to reconcile 2 answers to the same question. So on page 55, in the instructional services description, it says the increase of 1 in this account reflects an increased commitment to kindergarten orientation and play-based learning supplies. Both Mrs. Kennelly and I asked the same question, shouldn't that be 1.81? And there's 2 different answers. And answer B18, the answer to my question was from Ms. Laborious is this was an adjustment to shift from part-time staff to full-time staff. We converted from 1 full-time to 2 part-time. And then on page, answer the question 58, which is exactly the same from Mrs. Maxichinelli. Ms. Laborious said it should read 1.81. We'll make that correction. So I don't know where the answer to my question came from at all.
So there appears to be something that happened with insertion of rows in the document that we need to correct. It impacted about 5 of the questions. The answer to that question is the answer to your the question that you mentioned. It should be 1.8%.
So do we know what question the answer to B17 actually belongs to?
Yes. 17 or 18?
B7.
So the answer to question 18 was
sorry, 18.
The McKinley clerical. Rather than having 2 part-time clerks and a full-time clerical, we swapped out the 2 part-time for an additional full-time because the person we needed there needed to be bilingual and the full-time person wasn't, but one of the part-time folks was. So we couldn't then say anybody who needed translation services come only when that person's there. So it was just a swap out to me, and that person had an interest in working full-time. So it kind of worked out.
All right, I guess I want to make sure everyone's question has an answer that's represented on the sheet. So that's fine.
Yeah, that appears that got put in the wrong box. So I apologize, Jeff. So question B18, I'm going to delete that and answer to the 1.81% is what it should read. And we'll find, like Mike just said, what question that particular item is answering, because I'm not sure.
I think it's one right below it.
Yeah, I think it's my question on McKinley, B19.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for taking care of it.
And we actually changed that earlier today, and for some reason it keeps going back to that for B18. That we deleted it. We were all on the call. I don't know why it showed up again.
Mrs. Mexican.
Because then if you look at question 23, the answer to Mrs. Jacobson's question is thanks. So
Yeah, there's an
there as well.
issue. I'll read out the numbers that there are issues with, and it was, B23, B28, B31, B50, B55, and B61. So we will have to make those adjustments, and
You're
we can
going
talk
too
through
fast,
it.
Courtney.
Oh, I'm sorry. B23. It appears that someone, because we had a shared document, somehow there was insertions of lines that impacted the placement of the responses. So we apologize, and it impacted, I'll read them out, B23, B28, B31, B50, B55, and B61. We will make the adjustment and publish the corrected document. We can talk through the answers tonight as we go through.
Can I just suggest that we, along with doing that, just have one memo that lists all the errata
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
instead of trying to find your answer?
Yep.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
we apologize, but part of it was that a lot of us were working remote today, and I think just the shared document not working together in a room caused some minor issues with where the answers were placed.
We are on 54 to 58. Mr. Krasnoff.
So on B50, one of the ones that is not there, I looked at the surrounding answers and none of them fit. So is there any way you can elaborate on the answer? I could read the question if you want.
Yeah, Rob, that's a question for you, but it didn't get assigned to you because of those insertions.
Page 57.
It's page 57, and it's in regards to the other increase and the nursing increase percentages. Wondering if we can get a little bit more of a breakdown what those specific increases are in terms of especially other, because other could be a lot of things.
Just so I'm clear, we're talking about the pupil personnel services, line 62, the increase of
Correct.
628,879. That's primarily due to an increase in the number of projected students who are going to require, per their IEP, nursing services. It also requires, includes an increase in some specialized consultative services or direct support services for students who were either trying to maintain in district or students who we were looking to outplace, but for whatever reason, many of the outplacements also are short staff, so they're not accepting students. So that's where primarily that increase comes from.
So quick follow-up. I don't know if this is the right place where that would fall, but the legislation that made us do the evaluations and whatnot for students that are chronically absent, is that playing into part of this increase as well?
We are doing more evaluations. That definitely does not help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And if anyone has a question on that legislation, I'm happy to follow up. So I'm wondering if okay. All right, Mrs. Flynn.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that? Is any of that inclusive of like training services for paraprofessionals in terms of nursing or medical services? I know I've seen in past schools that sometimes a training can help a one-on-one, or can you just speak to if that is something that you're seeing?
The increase of that 628, nurses are trained ongoing, particularly if they're working with a student with like medical needs. We're in constant contact with Jill Mitchell to do some orientation of the students prior to working with the students, but the actual dollar impact on that is minimal.
Thank you for the clarification.
Can I follow up on my own? It's quite a substantial amount of money though. So we really need that much extra nursing and extra.
Well, nursing is expensive. That accounts for a couple $100,000. There are some, as I said, direct service providers that we need to contract with to work with some of our most impaired students.
So the other is more like subcontracting.
So in many cases, yes. It's also in this is specialized evaluations and consultations, which may include follow-up training and follow-up consultation for students who have significant needs.
And can I just add to that, Rob? And just if you look on that same page, page 57 on the nursing line, our 22-23 expense was $562K. Our current year estimate is higher than the budget of $300K. We'll get that into Q2. So that also reflects the current needs of the students adjusted for, what we anticipate for next year. So it is on trend with what we're spending now. The services are expensive.
And to what Rob mentioned, I think if we had to send students out of district, that cost would even be significantly higher to meet those, the needs of those children. So I think keeping them in-house, we're probably getting some bang for our buck, as well. Correct in saying that, Rob?
You are correct. And, for the first time in my career, like we are making referrals on some of our neediest kids, but a lot of the outplacements that we work with, they're experiencing shortages of staff, so they're not able to, accept students that they otherwise would have if they had the staffing.
Mr. Krasnov.
One more follow-up to that. In 22-23 was 1.4 million and change, and we dropped and budgeted $500,000. Just trying to understand where we're saving, where we're spending.
We split that up. It used to be one number. Now it's professional expense other. It used to be professional expense nursing and professional expense speech. Those three used to be just one number, but then we broke that down into nursing, speech, and other.
And additionally, if I could just add, Rob and Dave, the 1.4 million you see in expense and professional expense other, it happened, the board will recall that we had to transfer money from the paraeducator line to pay for behavioral therapists, and that was almost $700,000. And in next year's budget, those funds move back to the paraeducator line in anticipation that we'll be able to handle those services in-house.
Thank you, Courtney. That is correct. When we had to contract for behavior techs from outside agencies because we were not able to fill positions from the paras.
All right, there's just a lot of moving pieces and money. It's hard for me to keep track. So I'll look a little deeper. Thank you.
Anyone on 5458? Mrs. Flynn?
Hi. Question B57, and that's on page 57. The irony. So I see in the executive summary just the explanation for our middle school's student activity expenses, and I obviously I'm aware that this bucket may be represented in different places, and I'm not sure if this is for through the chair to Mr. Testani or James, but can you kind of speak to the variance between our three middle schools? Obviously our population at Roger Ludlow is a touch higher, but to see a 17% increase, drama reflected in one, but not in one of our middle, can you just speak to that whole area right there and what that speaks to?
That's school-based allocations, and they're able to create based on the needs that they feel for their students. So it's really autonomy amongst the three middle schools to utilize the bucket of money in a way that best meets the needs of the children within their schools.
And I would absolutely agree with that. So to me, looking at this document, they're doing something really great with sports at Roger Ludlow Middle School. So if that's working there, are we exploring that assured experience across our three middle school? Like, I'm just curious more of a breakdown of why are we seeing such a disparity and where are they saving? Because it says that that's reflected in supplies and text, that there may be let me read the school-based dedication to student activity expenses is offset by changes in the amounts of school leadership dedicated to supplies and texts. So if one school has a 17% variance in supplies and texts, is that being supplemented? Is that that just seems like a large variance to me in what we're doing. So I would just love a breakdown of what the programmatics look like. And
Can I say, Katie, it might help to look at the expenses. So how there's a per pupil allocation for the schools and how they initially allocate their budget is not always how they spend it. So they'll change amongst the buckets as they go throughout the year. So they get a per pupil allocation at the school level, and then they allocate those funds. So if you look at, for example, the most recent that we have expenses, they spent $3,000 at Woods, $3,400 at Roger Ludlow, and $3,100 at Tomlinson. The disparity in how they've allocated their budget at the start of the year is just, their starting point. I don't know if that doesn't exactly answer your question, but
Ms. Laborious,
mhm.
I wanted to also add that 17% represents $600. So in the grand scheme of their overall allocation, it's a small amount, but again, they do make the adjustments based on the changes that they've noticed in the current school year as well as previous school years. So just based on some of the transfers that they've had to do from other accounts into this one, Ms. Tiley felt that it was beneficial to go ahead and increase that particular line item by $600.
No, I appreciate that, and I'll absolutely go and look. But is this the only place that it's reflected, like where sports? I'm just trying to.
Yes, in terms of the middle schools, but they
Okay,
do have
great.
access to all the same sports at all three schools. So there's no disparity in terms of access at one versus another. It's just really about student choice and interest in terms of which sports they choose and the
Okay,
number of sports.
I'll
they
follow
choose.
up. Thank you.
Okay.
There
Thank
could
you.
be an increase one year to uniforms at one school and the other, you know what I mean? So $600 could be just uniforms for
I
one
think
year.
your
Yeah.
question is someone at one school not getting the same as someone else based on this allocation?
Yes.
To get to the point.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. And I don't,
And I'll get to the point in the book. I'll go look at
like,
the
meaning
breakdown.
you're trying to make sure, right? And I don't think that that's the case, but I would defer that.
As
Yeah,
Dr.
it's
Pilch
just
mentioned,
what they
all the
need that.
sports are at all
Yeah.
middle schools, so that everyone has equal access to compete.
Thank you for the spot to look for.
Mr. Lee?
Is adaptive sports part of this budget also for the three middle schools?
I do not believe so, but Mr. Mancusi can chime in on that.
Yeah, I do not believe so. I will confirm that, but I do not believe so.
Isn't that in the student activity fund, Mrs. Laborious, if I'm right, like a club
Correct, yeah.
account?
And that's correct. This is only those allocations that are part of the school-based allocation. So the adaptive would be in the student activity or in the district-wide pupil personnel budget.
Thank you.
The next one, Kennelly?
Yeah, and to piggyback on Mrs. Flynn's question, that unfortunately is one of the questions that got messed up, which was question 61, where at first I had asked, could we have the details of how that per pupil gets spent? And then the more I looked at it, more I realized that would be an onerous task to put it together. So I simply asked the 30,000 level, foot question of what does the oversight look like so that we can assure this? Because I'll give an example of something where we know there's a disparity between our schools, and that's field trips. The field trips that our three middle schools offer vary enormously from each other in terms of the experiences those children potentially get access to. One middle school has 2 overseas trips. One has none. And that to me is a certain degree of oversight, which is troubling. And so specifically focused on the budget, I had the same concern that Ms. Flynn had, and that was question 61. So again, I'm happy to wait on the answer to that since Ms. Laborious has already acknowledged that one got dropped off in terms of an answer to it. But it certainly is a concern because we also see very different levels at the high school. And that was something that I was waiting for next week's question, which is, now this would be more of a high school issue, but where do we see booster clubs influencing that, of giving experiences to students at some schools and not at their counterpart? Because that would be very concerning. It's going to be up to the district to make that up. If 2 different experiences, or in the case of our middle school, 3 different experiences are taking place. So that's not exactly a question, just more I'm looking, I am looking forward to the actual answer to number 61.
So the per pupil allocation is also something I've always been interested in, and I did ask for the updated chart, so there is a link in here. I don't know if anyone had time, so at least you'll see the dollar amounts. We have in the past gotten like how they're being spent. So it sounds like maybe that might be something to be updated and provided to the board as a supplemental material, just how the allocations are being expended.
Ms. Jacobson?
Yes.
May I ask a clarifying question with regard to the overseas field trips, that the question that Ms. Maxicanelli just began
Of
to
course.
pose?
Oh, yes, of course.
So I'm trying to get clarification in terms of experiences. So the overseas field trips are not board budget funded. I'm not sure if the request is that we then provide overseas field trips at each school that would require staff to then also agree to chaperone those trips. So I guess I just wanted more clarification, and maybe that'll be forthcoming in your follow-up question in regard to what it is that you're looking for with respect to the overseas trips. Because this year there's just one at Roger Ludlow. I'm not sure about the three, but there's just one overseas trip that's taking place for Roger Ludlow students.
So it's two separate topics, so I can answer that now. The budget question that I submitted, staying in my lane of the budget, was regarding the per pupil expenditure, which is not, I was not in any way looking to conflate with field trips. What I am conflating is the concern of the oversight of there not being wide discrepancies of experiences offered to our students. And while this year, I'll admit, the memos of overseas field trips in my mind have merged probably over the past few years, so I can't distinguish one year from the next. But there have definitely been many more field trip opportunities at some of the middle schools versus others. And that is not a budget issue. I'm not advocating that the district take care of it, but there's no question that we are offering different experiences to our children based on the school that they go to, as in even an opportunity being offered. And that is a concern of mine. Specific to tonight, it was solely focused on the per pupil expenditure. I'm raising the issue of the field trips as something where it is of note that there are different experiences, and we know that at our different schools based on where your child happens to be enrolled.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to provide the school-based spending historical as well, based on the school-based allocation. So I'll attach that as a link. That's something easy to produce.
Thank you very much, Ms. Laborious.
You're welcome.
Anyone else on 54 to 58? Okay, we will move on to tuition. Pages 70 to 72 in the budget book. Mr. Peterson?
Can I just note, not on this topic, but it might be helpful if when we got a printed version of the spreadsheet, it was organized by page number. We're going back and forth, like, questions on different areas of the book are on different pages of the sheet. And that's an artifact of us entering them at different times, but if they could be sorted
Yes.
before we print it out, that'd be very helpful.
Supposed to be sorting them actually by the get salaries, tuition, whatever it may be, which would help align the page numbers. Although I would just say, I don't know why some of these boxes are empty. So if people add in more questions, because I know I always use the drop down, but just be mindful to include that drop down when
I
you
know
put your question.
I included them on all
Yeah.
of mine, and I'm not seeing them on all of mine here. So
All right, it might be a PDF issue. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we just had a PDF issue, and we will fix all of that, and we'll highlight what gets corrected in a memo. And apologies.
Thank
But
you.
yes, we will sort it. That was an earlier request as well.
Okay, tuition 70 to 72. Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask the question that someone has asked every year for 12 years, which is for the out-of-district sped tuition. What could we offer in district that would lower this number that we are not currently offering? And I did not submit that question, so I apologize.
What I would say is this, because we have a lot of kids with a lot of different needs. And we've expanded programming in Fairfield Public Schools over the past well, since I've been here 7 years, we've opened up a lot of new programs in response to the need and the desire to try to maintain students in district, more because we believe that programming in district with non-disabled peers is preferable. But I think we do a good job on responding. I know the number seems high. Our prevalence rate has gone above the state average for the first time in, since I can tell. We had a huge success at McKinley with the Early Literacy Academy, which we now are staving off hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're able to defend our programming with that specifically. We now have the impact program. We have our social, emotional, mental health programs at the middle school level, at the elementary level. So I would say student needs are increasing. Our program offerings are expanding in response to that. But I appreciate the question. I just don't know if that's the answer you wanted to hear.
Well, no, because this budget is asking for almost $250,000 more. So I again ask, what needs aren't we meeting in-house that we are having to send? For example, I know that there were certain levels of emotional disturbance that we were not able to meet in-house despite our different levels of CLC, the TLC, the impact program, that was one area that I recall. Where are we currently specifically with what needs can't we meet in-house?
I would say students with significant mental health needs who present as, unstable, where there is safety concerns with some students, we're not able, nor do I think it's appropriate if there's significant safety issues. Those programs often are your most expensive programs. I will say also, and I'm trying to answer your question honestly.
This is a $9.1 million number. I mean, that's obviously more jarring even than the fact that we're having to ask for $250,000 more than last year. So I have to assume that a lot of that is exactly what I don't want to in any way sound like I'm questioning what you're saying, but to do our due diligence of where all of this money is going, it's obviously we made this investment in the Early Literacy Academy because we believed in, first of all, it's going to serve all of our teachers well to get that training, and a certain student population in particular. Well, we've got $9.1 million worth of needs we're not meeting.
I'm going to follow up a little bit. The 9.1 million, I understand what you're saying. We also are getting several $100,000 less in reimbursement. So that's contributing to that number going up a little bit based on the state legislation that reduced our reimbursement rate. We also have more kids who are not meeting our threshold because I asked some of those questions in here. So we're not getting less reimbursement because they're not meeting the threshold. And then I would say that I went back to at least pre-COVID to our charts on page 188 that tell like the breakdown of outplacements, and those numbers have started. I mean, before COVID, they were lower. Then we peak in the COVID time. They're starting to come down. Your proposal here is 134, which is less than last year, which is less than the next year, but the money is flat. And from my understanding, one of the problems is not necessarily what we aren't doing, but in part is that the outplacement places do not have a cap. So we can chase all
But
day.
Ms. Jacobson, just to correct your point or tell me that I'm wrong, this is not a reflection of getting less money from the state because that's in the revenue line. We're going to have less revenue. The expenses are the expenses. So less money from the state has nothing to do with the fact that this number is up.
With less revenue to pay for the expenses than the expenses.
But this is the revenue line. So in the revenue section, we're going to have less.
Yes.
That's
So
in the separate section. That has nothing to do with this number.
The expenses net of the revenue, the way that we reflected in this budget, and that's the way that we budget excess cost. So if there is a relationship between the reduced revenue and the increased cost to the district that you would see in this line.
Was that the same with our Title I grant money? Do we do the FTEs the same way, that we don't fully fund them in our expenses?
Different than the
Indicate them in our expenses? Do we do that the same way that you're just describing?
different, it's different for the Title I. We budget Title I grant directly in the grant. When there's a reduction to the Title I, we do have a conversation as to whether or not we will accommodate that in the board budget as part of this, our discussion with the board. But excess cost is different in that it's a reimbursement. And so it offsets expenses. It's not like a block or a title grant. So for that reason, it offsets expenses, and we did see a reduction down to 70% of our reimbursement for costs in excess of the 4.5 times pupil expense. So that does impact our expense that we show in the budget, our projected budget.
Courtney, could you just highlight what the projected excess cost reimbursement was for this year and then what it is for next year? Because our
Yeah.
PPE did
So,
increase, so the threshold went up, so we are getting less reimbursement for the students who do cross that threshold. But if you could just highlight the difference in the excess cost reimbursement for this year and propose
Sure.
for next year.
Yeah, so this year, on page 188 of the board book, 70%, it's 2.7 million is the projected reimbursement. So you can see the total gross expenditures if you look at that page for our outplacements on the top, and then our unilateral placements. So we have a gross tuition, and then we have the offsetting revenue. Similarly, in last year's budget, I'm just looking now at the page. You bear with me for just one moment. Yeah, so we had a total gross projected tuition amount for the private, for the outplacements and the unilateral placements of 12,378 million, and the 70% reimbursement was 3.2 million projected. For a total projected tuition in that budget of 8.9 million. So there's a relationship. That's why it's a little bit tough when you look at the settlements and placements. You've got to break it down with the outplacements and then the unilateral placements. Sometimes there's something different going on with the two, and then you've got to look at your projected revenue reimbursement. Our line for the tuition is net of the revenue.
So I think what she said is last year's projected total cost of outplacements and settlements is more than this year's, but what we're getting back or reimbursed through excess cost is it's significantly less.
That's correct.
Mr. Krasnoff.
I just have a quick follow-up and forget my ignorance because I don't know the ins and outs of the program. Once someone is outplaced, is it that they either graduate or age out, or do they sometimes rematriculate? And then in terms of that, how do numbers come and go on this?
Kids come back all the time. Sometimes they don't, depending on what their individual needs are, but kids come back from outplacement all the time. When they come back, we no longer pay that $100,000 outplacement tuition. So that would reduce our tuition line by $100,000, hypothetically speaking, but on the same, the same token as we may be looking at placing another kid out. So it's a fluid thing, kids coming or kids getting placed out, depending on their needs and the decisions of the PPT.
In terms of Ms. Maxcanelli's question, is there a way we can help them come back and rematriculate? Is there maybe a program we can look at to try to bring the kids back into the fold so we can, in the long run, save some of this money?
I will say this, I do meet with a great team of special ed program directors. We meet weekly, we review our, outplacement kids. We talk about who can we return to district, what support they might need in district. That is a conversation that happens all the time.
Thank you for clarifying.
Mr. Lee.
Again, also part of my ignorance, but do we as a district, do you have a say where they're placed, or is it the parents saying they need to go here because of this? And then if so, do we have other options to say you have to send them here?
Again, those are PPT decisions. It really is our responsibility to identify an appropriate outplaced program for a student depending on what their profile is.
So it sounds like this, from what Mrs. Maxon Kennelly said for the past 12 years, this isn't going away. This isn't a fix that we can say down the line, because it doesn't sound there's going to be something that this district just can't provide, that we're going to have to outsource some child for some reason somewhere where cost can't be an issue because they need that placement at this specific school or situation.
Well, we know we're legally obligated to provide services to students with disabilities as mandated in their IEPs. Where that takes place is a decision that the PPT makes. We start with the least restrictive environment being generally the home school, and based on the individual needs and the severity of the needs of the student is, it guides the decision-making process.
Mrs. Lynn.
This is just a quick follow-up. Are you, just on a more broad level, are you seeing tuitions at these outplacement facilities raising at a rate that you think we're ever going to kind of, obviously they're private organizations, I assume that they can raise their rates as they see fit. Are you seeing that that's a race you guys are struggling with?
The past few years, tuitions have increased more than they have in the past.
Thank you.
Mrs. Maxon Kelly?
Yeah, this is getting back to Mr. Lee's point. I'd asked in question 62, because in fact, not all of these placements are as a result of the PPT, because we have 52 unilateral placements. And so I had asked you, because this was a question, we'd done a deep dive on this a number of years ago, in terms of how our legal fees justifying what our, I hate to put it this way bluntly, but our win-loss record in terms of addressing unilateral placements, because just to be clear, those are placements where they are not accepting the decisions of the PPT. The parents are making their own decision. So I'm assuming that these are 52 losses, which does not count the unilateral attempts where we won the case. I'm just wondering, how are we doing on that? Because that question you did not answer of mine.
Okay, what I would say is I tried to answer it.
It was a pretty big question, so
You ask really good questions, so I tried to answer it. I will say, in terms of unilateral placements, that's where, like, you really, and I've explained this before, you have to analyze the facts of the case, see where your exposure is, and that really will help you in your decision-making process. I can tell you, we are getting better and better and better at, having less of a cost share in those unilateral placements, particularly if we feel that we have an appropriate program in district or a more appropriate, state-approved private special ed program that parents may not want their child to go to.
thank you.
I have one follow-up too. On page 15, question F3, it looks like. I had asked for this year's currents just because I'm trying to get a trend line to budget to current. So it's just for those who may not know, this year we had in our budget book 140 outplacements total. If I'm reading this correctly, Mr. Mancusi, it looks like currently we're at 128. Is that what I'm reading that?
At this point in time, as of today, we're at
Right.
128.
Okay, so it could.
That's a fluid number, though.
Of course, I understand. So a little bit less, so that might change. My follow-up was though, thank you for providing the categories. What I was kind of just looking for more was what we just went over in the back of the budget book, like the settlements, So like the budget to budget is what I'm trying to get at here. So that can just be a follow-up that I'll follow up.
All right. The reason I put categories.
But I love that you put that.
Well, that's what we use for the cost avoidance sheet. We categorize them. So that's how I interpreted it. I'm sorry. I will get you that information.
All right. Anyone else on tuition? No? Okay. Moving on to other purchase services, pages 73 to 82. Explain.
Excuse me, because I can't find a page number, but it's question B64 from Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and I actually had a similar concern about the variance in conference and staff development days between our elementary and middle school. The answer given is that this is decided by our building principal staff, which I really appreciate, but especially in looking at the rollout of a very large investment of ELA. Is any of that staff training compulsory across the district? So is each building principal, they're allowed, so if one building, and I'm being completely hyperbolic now, just is going to decide we're going to do all of our training on socio-emotional, is that where we're going? Like, are we seeing an investment directed by the district as a whole, or is it really that each building principal is deciding their PD for each building?
The district training comes out of the district account. The ones you're seeing for outside travel is when a teacher perhaps finds a conference they want to go to that is not something we're sending everybody to, but is in alignment with their school improvement plan. They may send that teacher out of their building funds to a conference outside of district.
Thank you.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
I've written down the questions I want to circle back to. Question 36 was regarding the DEI, professional development and leadership that Mrs. Flynn asked, broken out at $125,000. And I guess I'm not willing to accept the phrase DEI training anymore. At this point, we are several years into having this as an explicit focus, and I'd like to know for what. Obviously, the board might have feelings that we've lost a couple of years on that through not having more focused feedback to the board. So I recognize that despite it being a topic for years, I feel like we've kind of lost some ground in terms of getting a handle on for what. But I have to ask now, where are we seeing that our staff, I know that leadership, for example, this past summer had some on restorative practices, which they found incredibly rewarding. And that's great to hear, that, something so tangible, which is obviously now part of our high school practice and maybe middle school also. But now what are we looking at? Where are we seeing deficits that we want addressed? Because again, this blanket DEI training, I'd like to hear more.
Sure. So The restorative practice training was done with the entire administration at all levels. We are also now moving along with teachers as well. So again, that is a focus that, if you want to say, falls in the bucket of equity and inclusion. We're doing work, obviously, a lot of work with our special education department to make sure that we have programs that meet the needs of students in district so that they have access to curriculum. Grade level curriculum. We're doing a lot of work with our administrators, our coaches, so that that trickles into the classroom so that all students are getting access. Again, equity and inclusion. Part of what you're going to find in your board professional learning is really looking at data around disparities within the district and how we can provide programming and provide opportunities for students to get access. So I think that's where the focus is heading, rather than maybe what it was envisioned previously, because I think that we have a better handle on where we're at and where we need to go so that we're meeting the needs of actual individual students within the school district, rather than focus on something that we're not going to get any results from.
Well, and I enormously appreciate that you just said where we have data regarding deficits. So now this is getting targeted. Again, I think at some point we'd love to hear more on that topic, but that's what I was hoping to hear with this.
You will in 2 weeks, because that's part of the 2 hours is diving into the data that we are providing the individual as he enters into the district. And that'll be part of that 2-hour session, is really looking at the data. Based on a spreadsheet that we were asked to provide and fill out and provide the information, so that that could be the focus, so that the board has an understanding of where some of our deficits are, where some of our strengths are, and how do we capitalize on our strengths and improve upon our deficits.
Thank you.
Bob, can I may follow up? And when you say the data, are you talking more like achievement data, or are you including like our surveys and the climate surveys from the buildings and things like that as well?
For that initial session, it's around achievement, attendance, suspension, special education, more along that general data, not survey data. That's just the request of the presenter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, my question, I think, Mrs. Flynn, because I was going to follow up on my own question 64, that just, wanting that kind of assured feeling, that assured experience of students, staff being trained in one building and not getting that in another is inevitably going to lead to some discrepancies in staff offerings. So thank you for your answer on that. I would hope that if it's of a special value training, that we have a system in place for having that, whether it's a report back measure and then it gets filtered out, or it's on those days where it's district-wide professional development and a staff member who's traveled gets to then lead a workshop for others. I hope something like that is part of this. Did I just do a great job of answering my own question?
You did.
Thanks. All right, so then I'll just move on. Question 65 that I asked, and maybe this is something that I missed. When we talk about the district switched back to the regular summer school program that requires general budget funding, I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember our discussing that last year. I know that the board had, and there was no vote taken, but I know there was a general sense of some questions regarding our support for continuing the summer boost program, because if we didn't see the data, we weren't looking to continue that investment, because coming out of our ESSER money, it wasn't costing us anything. But I don't recall us deciding to reinvest in it, and thus it's coming within this price tag that we're now looking to continue. Because I'd also thought in the past, but this one I could be wrong about, that in the past when we had summer offerings, there was a tuition tag for that as well. So could you speak to that?
Sure, of course. So probably in 2020, I may be off a year, we had what they called the Literacy Academy for summer school, which students went to. That switched after COVID-19 and it became Summer Boost. We've essentially discontinued that program and have gone back to a more literacy summer school program for students with different entrance criteria. That would be under the general budget versus the boost, which was under the ARP ESSER account.
And did we get, is that the kind of thing we got any kind of report on? I mean, actually, no, this is answering my question. So if you look on page 77, we didn't have that this past summer. It was zeroed out. Or am I looking at the wrong line in terms of instructional services under 60? We zeroed that out. So we didn't offer it this past summer. So what's going on?
We were able to offer it when we realized we didn't have the funding for ARP ESSER through the general budget. I'd call on Ms. Laborious to see where those numbers are within the budget for last year, but we did have a summer program last year. It didn't go all the way to middle school, similar to the Boost program went, so it was not as large. It was significantly smaller. The Summer Adventures, which is what you're referring to with the tuition, ran as part of ESY, which was in a different building, and the kindergarten program, Safety Town, also ran, which is tuition-based as well, which ran as part of the non-special education ESY program.
And so that's an awful lot of information that I'm wondering, where is it reported on and where do we have any, I mean, for those other programs, we had whole presentations on how did they go, what was the data that came out of them.
It's not part of our fall data presentation to look at the students who are in the elementary students who are in the summer school program and how they performed in the fall.
But that's also because we didn't know it was happening.
That is possible.
I'll speak for myself. I did not know it was happening, and it clearly was in the budget. So, Ms. Laborious, or through the chair to Ms. Laborious, can you speak to where this was budgeted?
So I apologize. I don't know at this moment. I know that we created this budget structure so it would be transparent so you could see the summer school, but because it wasn't in the original budget last year, I believe it might have been paid out of the ESY summer school account. I'm not sure. I will verify that and I'll get that as a follow-up response to this question.
Okay. So I look forward to that being detailed a little bit more, but then I had also asked about in line 62 regarding the travel reimbursement, which went up considerably, and I was wondering why that was being maintained. That's a lot of money for travel within Fairfield? Is that what that's for? That's line 62 I was asking about.
Courtney, if you could speak to that, please.
Yeah, that's part of the travel reimbursement budget for travel within Fairfield. That's correct. We can take another look at that. This is what was proposed as the mileage based on the current year experience. The current year budget is 17,000, but as you can see, the 22-23 expense was 9,674. So I can review why it increases so much, Jen, and get back to you on that. But this is the request that was put in by the group that handles the mileage accounts. It's for local travel.
Okay, and just, I did already submit the question, but I can just pin a follow-up just so you know that I was asking about that again.
Okay.
And then one other question I had was for number 67, and not exactly a budget issue, but I was hoping, through the chair to Dr. Zavajanzik, you could explain a little bit more about what happened with AP Italian. That's been a lingering question, and I just want to knock that question off because I was really excited for us to offer that. And so I don't understand the irregularities in course sequence among the language offerings.
Sure. So just to refresh everybody's memory on this, we brought some courses forward last year, I guess it was, one of them being AP Italian. We gave the presentation and then the administration decided not to bring it forward for a vote, particularly based on the questions that were posed to us at the board meeting, which was how can a student essentially get to AP Latin year 4, but it takes 6 years in Spanish, for example, 6 years in French. So during the curriculum review, it is something we're looking at to make sure that there aren't those irregularities, that it, essentially takes 2 years longer in certain languages to take the AP course by our curriculum, that it wasn't in the Italian class, and the curriculums are sequenced similarly.
Oh, thank you for that. AP Latin, I understand the question being raised, but with AP Italian, I thought we'd kind of addressed that already, as it was understood that that was going to be for native speakers. So that's why they would be able to do that. We weren't thinking that a non-native speaker, because that's why they were going to be combined AP Italian and Italian 4 in a single classroom, but okay.
Yeah, so anybody could obviously take the AP test. With that, we didn't want to put a curriculum course on the books that was dissimilar to the way the curriculum structure lays out from 1 through 4 or 1 through 6.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. On page 74 and 321, it says under the professional development and curriculum writing, this year's budget reflects the commitment to world language in ELA, math, and tech ed for program improvement. I checked last year's budget book and it was also world language and tech ed. And then I'm looking at our review coming up for 24-25 and we're doing world language. So that makes sense. But we're also doing library and media, video and computer applications. So, and then I'm looking at what's allocated to that versus other areas and just wondering why it didn't seem to be that much. Or like basically less, actually, a reduction.
For which departments? Library and computers?
Yeah, so if you go to 78, under 60, you'll see all like the different areas. So you'll see a nice healthy boost there for tech ed. Nice one this year. That's significantly higher for world language, coming down a little bit for next year. But just, is it just not a big update or something, or?
Library's been working on theirs over the past few years. So they're a little bit, and I mean during, when I say working on, not during the summer, they're using their department time and so forth. World Language started their review. We're trying to start all the reviews a little bit earlier than obviously the year before the review. So World Language started last summer. Library and computers began through the department time and are continuing to work through it. And we'll finish up this summer as well. So we are spacing it a little bit differently, but they are definitely curriculum reviews that will be brought forward to this board next year.
Just, again, 60 professional development district, is that 62,966? Is that the same thing that Mrs. Maxon Kennelly was just talking to, or is that something different? The increase, it's 317,740, increase of 62,000, almost 63,000. Is that the same thing?
That's the same thing. It includes the DEI work and professional learning and so forth.
Okay. That's all I have. Mr. Krasnoff?
I just have an overall question about professional development. Again, I'm sorry if this is me being naive or not knowing the answer. But I am now on the CES board, and I found out there is some state-funded professional development. We keeping tabs on like what they're doing and when they're doing it.
From the state funded or the in-district?
The state-funded ones that they're doing. So like, for example, they just got state funding for training for the implementation guides for ELA. So it might be something we want to keep an eye on, because if we can get some professional development that's already state-funded through CES, and maybe you can lower some of these numbers.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if that is for the open access document. I'd have to look into that. I know the state is going through each discipline and placing all their curriculum on Go Open CT to create that.
According to them, they're working on like a form implementation guide, but they're getting funding from the state to either come to the district and help with it, or us go to them for training. But something like that may help, and anything going down the road, there may be opportunities if we keep closer tabs. Now, obviously, I'm going to be going to meetings and try and see what's going on. I'll let you know anytime I hear about something, but it might be an opportunity to save some money.
Thank you.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Sorry, I had one more question. So through the chair to Ms. Ingram, this is question 68. And I just find this to be a not thoroughly explained, but again, small boxes. So I'm hoping you can help me. So in the budget book, it's page 79, line 67, the professional growth tuition. We budgeted 2 years ago for 228,000. We basically spent half. We budgeted the same amount, and the estimated amount, I guess I don't put a lot of credence in that. That just seems to be holding. But that would seem to be a budget item we could cut 50 to 75,000 from and not blink. We've historically underspent it, so I don't understand holding at that number.
Hi, Kanika Ingram, Executive Director of Human Resources. And so we're holding at that number due to the FEA contract. So we are anticipating that we would spend almost all of that budget for the 24-25 school year.
What does that have to do with the FEA contract?
We opened the 7th year lane up.
So-
Now, that
Thank you.
gives all those people in the 6th year the opportunity to slide over. So we've already seen a significant number of folks put in requests for approval for programs, for courses. So
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
So is it potential that we go over what's budgeted?
I highly doubt it. I don't think a lot of the teachers have looked into opportunities for their graduate work that is within the purview that would qualify them to slide over a lane, but they're looking at some cost-effective ways where they're cohorting, they're bundling courses through some platforms that are now available through some accredited universities. So I think they're also knowing that they have to come out of pocket and there's only a limited number of dollars reimbursed to them each year. They're also being cost aware of how much is coming out of pocket to make sure that it's worth their their return on investment, so to speak, getting into the higher lane. So
Just one quick follow-up on that. In my district, there's a pot of money, and once it's spent, it's done. So there's no, is it the same? So we can't go over budget on this line.
I would highly doubt we'd ever even get near it. So, but I think we're going to see more people take advantage of it than we have in the past. We're not going to be under budget that as much as we have been.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Supplies, text, and materials, 83 to 97. I'll start while people are looking. I'm going to go to question number 71. The 124 increase is to get additional AI detection to turn it in. So it's actually a question submitted by Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly. So I hope you don't mind, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, if I follow up. The $25,000 for turn it in was supposed to have been cut as directed by the superintendent. It was something that the head principals had requested, but it didn't make it into the budget. Just looking for clarification on that.
Hi, this is Zakia Parrish, Deputy Superintendent. So this is software that was originally requested through the head principals of the high schools. After we've recently engaged in some professional learning from a consultant through Ed Advance in reference to AI. And one of the things he pointed out is that this particular software has a very low efficacy rate, and that it basically was not worth the investment of money to purchase this platform. It basically was not going to give us what they thought it was going to give us. So upon receiving that information, along with other learning that we had that particular day, we did decide that this was something that we would not move forward with in the budget. So it would end up showing up as a part of the overall cuts. It didn't happen prior to the creation of the budget book, thus the reason it was still included, but it is something that we are proposing to be included in the cuts as a part of the board.
Adjustments. Okay, so that 124,094 on page 93 for Infotech instructional software, that's a possible amendment of this 25,587. Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay.
No problem.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly?
Yeah, two follow-ups to that. Our teachers, because obviously Turnitin was historically used for a plagiarism check. And that's not something that we're now going to have as a tool available to our staff?
We do have other tools. We do have Ms. Burns on that can talk about the tools that are available that we pay for through our Google Enterprise account. This particular tool we did previously cut. It was added back specifically for the AI feature just this past year, but it's something that the other features that it offers, we do get coverage. And if Ms. Burns can come on and speak to that coverage, that'd be great.
Yep, I'm on. Thank you, Zakia. The additional thing that we have is a Google Originality Reports. We started that, I think 3 years ago, if I remember correctly. And it basically does the same thing the basic version of Turnitin does, which is that plagiarism verification process, and allows kids to check their work, of course, before they actually submit it for those kinds of issues. So we do have that in place. And actually, that was a teacher request those years ago. To put that in place rather than the Turnitin document. I'm sorry, but my phone is blasting, of course, while I'm talking. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so just so I can be explicitly clear, this is this is something teachers actually prefer. Because I agree that the AI detection, first of all, there's nothing out there that's any good for AI
Correct.
detection. Turn it
Absolutely
into a
correct.
little box, but it's always 0, which is rubbish.
Yeah.
But so the plagiarism check, there is a tool in place for staff to use, and it's one that they prefer.
Yes, and it works much more seamlessly with the Google products like Google Docs and such. And that's one of the reasons that they wanted to use it. The other key point is that we build a repository of the students' submissions. I know Ms. Jacobson is thinking, oh my God, privacy. It's all locked down well, but one of the concerns that students, or rather the teachers had, was that siblings and friends of underclassmen were sharing papers that they had submitted when they were younger. And there was a lot of that going around, and it was hard to catch. And they feel the Originality Reports gives them a better heads up there because they're seeing internal documentation, not just external documentation that was available over the internet. Basically, the repository of papers that are available to validate against. So that was the reason.
The superintendent, I may need to follow up with you on that one for personal reasons. So thank you.
Anytime.
We're happy to help.
Yeah. But the other thing I'd wanted to ask about, because I know we've spoken about Freckle in past meetings, and I see here that there was a switch to IXL, which I have heard wonderful things about, but this is new information again, unless I missed it before, and I was wondering if somebody could speak to that.
I would have to defer to James on that one.
Yeah, so I will, Dr. Dana Shavetsky could talk, and Ms. Goss can talk about the ELA and the math piece. Freckle was a STAR product, and we also switched over from Renaissance STAR, which was our universal screener last year, to NWEA. Not that we couldn't also purchase Freckle, but we thought to go in a different direction, which integrates the programs, and I'll turn it over to them if they want to talk about the content-specific need for both of those programs. Ms. Goss?
So in terms of Freckle, I don't have anything to add. We decided not to purchase any of the online platforms for ELA. At this time, we want to see, based on our first year of implementation, what the needs would be. And so if we do need to add something, we will be able to do that with some hard data. There are some schools that are looking to spend some of their funding on a platform called Lexia Core 5, and that is happening sparingly. But again, they're going to monitor student growth in that program before we make a recommendation to expand that to other buildings.
So no IXL for ELA?
No IXL for ELA. They're using it in math. We do have one school that has asked about IXL for ELA, to be fair. They are going to take a look at it. This is Dwight Elementary. One of the things that I've always feared about IXL in the past is that things are done very much in isolation, and then there is not transfer to learning. So we're going to take another look because, again, to be fair, I have not used IXL in several years, and so it could have improved in the area of ELA. They do really like the platform in the area of mathematics.
Transition over to math.
Are you having trouble unmuting? Yeah, she just texted me. She's having difficulty with her sound.
Well, then if someone could get me that information later, that would be fine, because I would appreciate, I have never used IXL either. I know middle schools in my district use it and love it, but I think that's an interesting point if they're just isolating their skills and it's not integrated very well. But I appreciate that you're not just jumping in on it. And however, then I do have to ask, this line does come with a $124,000 increase. So at this point, I'm afraid to say I have lost track of why it's $124,000 more.
So Nancy could come on. There's some in the response, she's written up some of the reasons. Nancy, could you go through some of the? Yeah.
Yep, I actually broke it down. I believe Ms. Jacobson also asked a similar question in another portion of the document. Move This World was another program that was brought on last spring. That's for social emotional learning. That one is $67,000 of that 124.
And to be clear, that wasn't something we had budgeted for at all?
That's correct. That was something Mr. Testani, I believe Mr. Hatzis had brought that forward. So I would ask that they speak to that. The IXL learning you discussed. Mystery Science is also something that we brought forward. That had been purchased 3 years ago under and pre-bought for 3 years by the previous science coordinator or director, I should say. And we needed to renew that. It's used exclusively at the elementary schools, and they use it pretty heavily in their science program. And the last one was the Turnitin, which we've discussed. So that's pretty much the whole 124K.
Mr. Testani, could you speak to that at all? Because I know we talked about that, but I didn't do a book to book comparison on that one.
We did talk about that significantly, so that we'll have to look into that a little bit further.
So what happened is after Mr. Testani came in and we were talking about the SAL multi-year plan, him and Mr. Hatzis brought in Move This World, right? It was after he started, but it wasn't a budgeted item, and it was about $70,000 from what I recall to get it up and going during the year.
Yeah, Mr.
So you were
Hatzis.
told about it, it just wasn't in our budget.
Yeah, Mr. Hatzis led a committee of folks that looked at some different opportunities, and this was the one that they settled on, which we found to be a good product that will meet the needs of the district. We have had some conversations as time goes on, what we'll do, we have it, I think, for 3 years or 2 years. So
we're not using it this year at all?
We are. No, we are. And so we're using it this year, and this is obviously for next year.
And how did we pay for it?
That was paid for out of last year's spend out. We were able to pre-purchase this year's portion, but we need to fund it for next year to continue the additional year of the contract.
Thank you.
Anyone else on 83 to 97? Mrs. Maxon Canelli?
I apologize. Question 69 regarding the gifted and talented consultant. For almost 20,000 the answer, which again, in general terms, I understand, we set aside funding to develop and review the program and curriculum for the 25-26 school year. But I'm kind of interested in backing up, because obviously I know it's a topic we've been excited to broach. I know you've had several different ideas, and I know you've talked to at least a few other districts regarding this. And so my understanding of hiring a consultant is they have to be charged with something. And so I was wondering, where is the discussion taking place through PTAs, in our elementary schools, in our middle schools, at the board level, of what do we even want from this, so we can tell the consultant what to be looking for, you know, what's going to be the direction of the district, because we have so many choices before us. So I'm not saying that 18,800 is going to break the bank, but still, I want to get something for it because we've been waiting for this for quite a while.
So as of the last district improvement plan update, the professor we were working with has not accepted any funding for the work she's done so far because she really wants to help Fairfield move forward with this. She's committed to looking at our programming. There are best models out there that she's given us to look at, and then we'll move forward with feedback from parents and other constituent members and what our program will look like. I did want to put it in the budget as a placeholder in the event that we did need funding in order to, you know, build a curriculum with this person, get materials, et cetera, to bring forward to you.
Okay, no, I appreciate that because I would hate for the work to be stopped because we didn't hold something for it. I just, you know, expressing again my interest in hearing more about it. So thank you.
Okay. Looks like we're moving on to our last section, capital 109 to 114. Mr. Issa.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. I will apologize for not having my questions entered in time, but I will submit some. But just a quick question, really quick here that I didn't submit, and I don't expect an answer now. But there was a survey that went out to the elementary parents regarding Chromebook usage, and you know, whether the parents felt, I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but could you just touch on that quick?
Sure. So we did send out a survey just to get an idea of from parents whether the Chromebooks being brought back and forth daily for charging and those kind of things. Students were actually being asked to utilize them and how frequently. And we got a kind of a mixed review to the point where we didn't think it was going to get us. We didn't get enough data in one way or the other, whether we should not continue sending the devices home on a daily basis rather than buy a significant number of carts so that they can stay within the building charging overnight and then taken home as needed. So rather than make the huge investment basically it was about a 58-42% split as to parents who felt that it was coming home on a regular basis and kids were being asked to do work on it, to those that didn't really see that they needed it every day to be brought home. So buying the number of carts that we would need for 11 elementary schools would have been a significant investment that we didn't feel was worth the effort given the results of that survey.
So just to be clear, the investments of the carts, though, would be a short-term investment for a long-term change in strategy, correct?
Yes and no. The carts do have a shelf life as well. So, and I do think that because of the replenishment plan that we have and also the insurance that parents are purchasing, I think it's probably not an investment that's maybe worth mentioning, investing in right now.
Okay, so the plan long-term is to keep those in the refresh cycle over time.
Yes, and I think we have a pretty good refresh cycle now with the 6th and 9th graders with that purchase. So it's more predictable, and those Chromebooks after 3 years in middle school that get dropped down are in very good condition, I think, for elementary students.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. The survey that you sent out was to parents, not to teachers, because was it to parents?
Elementary parents who felt that, because the question was raised whether the elementary students needed to bring their devices home back and forth every night for charging. And some parents felt that, yeah, kids were coming home needing the device. And then there was some that said not every night, but it wasn't telling enough for us to invest in carts so that they would remain in school overnight.
Thank you. I guess my feedback would be that the teachers probably would be a good source for that information if you were having trouble getting that from the parents, because they would know if they were indicating for their students to do that. Is that correct?
Well, we had no issues getting parents to respond. It was just not what we expected, because some parents that initiated, why we initiated this said, I don't know why my child has to bring home the device every night. They're not using it for work, schoolwork. And then when we did the survey, we found that it wasn't significant either way that we would invest in that. So,
okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Mr. Kasnoff.
I hate speaking from experience because I want to speak for everyone, but I know in my situation, he gets homework on it on a regular basis. So I think it depends on how the teacher's using it more than how the parent sees it.
Mrs. Lynn, follow up?
I guess this is about, I want to say out of naiveness too, I think my husband filled out the survey, but was there a question on there if they're exclusively bringing it home just to charge? I know from, once again, just speaking as a parent in the district, I have gotten several emails throughout the district that our Chromebooks are coming home specifically to charge, whether it be testing that week or something. So is that something we're looking across the district? Is that something that it's exclusive in only certain buildings?
No, we were just trying to get a sense from parents if they thought that the device was only coming home to charge and there wasn't enough work actually being assigned that needed the device. So, having, elementary kids transporting back and forth a device unnecessarily just for charging, if we would provide a charging station, then that wouldn't have to happen. And
Basically, do we need to take the things home?
Correct.
We don't want to take them home. Can we just leave them in school?
Thank you for the clarification. No, it makes more sense now when you said, thank you. I thought it was.
Mr. Lee.
Did you ask on the survey that, I don't know, I have the child in elementary, are they used for something else besides school at home? Because that could be the one laptop that family may have at home.
we thought about that as well, and we didn't want to really ask that question, because if that's what they need as a family, we are more than happy to provide it for the small charge of what the device costs.
I have a quick question on 110. And it's the last sentence about the high school drumline equipment that was purchased 16 years ago, and that they're beyond repair and maintenance. A second set of equipment for the remaining high school will be budgeted the following year. My question is that line item portrayed on page 113? 60 special instrument music for 11,296. If anyone
Yes.
knows. Oh,
That account includes, so instructional 24096, let me just find my place here, includes the guitars, and the music department always puts in certain replacement instruments each year. I'm not sure which two they chose this year, if it was a cello or not, but essentially that's what's in that line item you wrote.
so where do I find the drum?
I'm sorry. That's in the
Because I think if it's like that amount of money, I'm like, can we just get both high schools the drum line? Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm just wondering.
It got cut off from the response to Jeff's B56, but it is on page 113, account 2400-542-010. So you'd find it in the
have those
equipment
numbers.
replacement schools, Department 64.
26,800?
Uh-huh.
Is that entirely the drum line?
No, it's not entirely the drum line. There's a whole bunch of pieces that are in that. The drum line, it got cut off, but I think it's about $5,000. So I can get that. Let me see. No, sorry, I
can
only
follow
have.
up. I'm just, if
Mhm.
they're bad, if they're shape and it's $5,000, something that I think about so that both high schools can get them.
Okay. I'll do it as a follow-up.
Mr. Krasnoff, that's why I was asking first.
I just have a quick question about the technology outlay of funds. I do like seeing the negative impact or the credit versus other years in the budget. But is this something we're going to see a spike in the next year or the following year because we're not replacing some technology now?
No, we are. We're just doing it more systemically. So we're replacing it at grade 6 and 9.
That's it.
Yes.
Okay.
It was also because of the budget surplus, wasn't it? This number is down because of a surplus, not because we're not buying something.
Correct. We did do some pre-buying as well.
$1 billion left.
Yeah, no, that I get. I'd rather space out funds than just lower it one year and spike it next year, because then it just messes up the numbers that we're planning each year. I don't want to be chasing the dragon every year.
Because we were able to do a multi-year strategy, so Nancy has a multi-year plan, and because we look at what the needs in a multi-year way, at year end, if we do have surplus funds as a result of, for example, a warm winter, we plan on a continuous basis to look at those multi-year plans for kilns and school equipment, for example, drum lines, for facilities and for IT. Things that have a multi-year life cycle to be able to pre-purchase, so we could budget a little bit more aggressively rather than conservatively in those lines.
So we won't see like an $800,000 spike next year.
No, Nancy,
Hopefully
did
not.
you have something to say? I saw you.
Well, typically we have a 5-year recycle plan. Some equipment goes longer than that, some goes less. I don't expect that you'll see a large jump next year. Because as Mr. Testani said, the way we are refreshing the Chromebooks now is pretty systemic, and other than the enrollment numbers variation, you won't see too much of a spike in that. But there may be those times where, for example, the interactive boards, we spent a lot of money replacing them recently because we have boards that go back 15, almost 20 years at this point, and they are starting to fail very quickly. And we had deferred a lot of that because first we were really just trying to get our arms around how well they worked in the classroom. And secondly, we're waiting for sort of the technology to catch up to our teachers. Last year we went through a whole project where we evaluated, I think it was 7 different vendors, had teacher input, student input, and came up with the new Promethean boards that we've been installing, and the teachers just love them. So as we see more of the older smart boards go, we'll be buying more of those boards as well. So there may be an uptick in replacing that equipment, but then saying that, it also means that our cost of supporting the projectors and the older smart boards goes down. So there are some operational benefits to doing that refresh on the equipment. I'll also add that we've been able to get roughly 60 interactive boards through the PEGPISHA grant at the state, and we've applied for more. So we're trying to mitigate that impact also through using grant funds.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, this is a bit of a capital question, but it kind of piggybacks off of question B38, which is it's referenced on page 98, but Mrs. Jacobson asked for an updated tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 maintenance update. And as I'm looking at it, It still lists the playground at the ECC Stratfield as a tier 2 priority with no number attached to it. I just was wondering if you could speak to, now we're bringing on a third site with Holland Hill, which I'm very happy to hear has a playground that's well adapted for that population. What is going on at Stratfield and what's going on with the playground?
Mrs. Jacobson, isn't that a topic for next week? Page 98? I apologize.
No worries.
I
Save it
didn't
for
read
next
those
week.
pages, so I apologize.
I got confused with capital. I apologize. I will ask next week.
All right, anyone else? Wow. Going once, going twice. Well done. All right, so everyone knows what sections we're doing. I think, does the same rule apply, Mr. Testani? Questions for the next sections are due Sunday? Is that correct?
Yes, Sunday.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, Sunday's great, especially given the fact that Monday's not a holiday this year.
Yeah.
This week, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was a little challenging, but we're good.
Two quick follow-up questions, and I'm just reminding about process, Mrs. Jacobson. One, will there be an initial item on opportunity for follow-up on this? And then will there be public comment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. It was supposed to be on here, but I just missed it for today as well, but for the public comment. All right, everybody. So unless anyone has any last minute questions, I'll take a motion to adjourn, please. Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mrs. Rinaldi. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. All right, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. Safe travels home, everyone. And thank you everyone on WebEx for being here as well. See you. Thank you.